Hey everybody, and welcome to chapter number 11. This is an exciting one. This is one of my favorite ones, actually. I know I always say that my favorite chapters are chapter 14 and 15 because those are the chemical senses, but chapter 11 holds a very special place in my heart because it deals with music, which I love, and it deals with speech perception, which I find extremely interesting. So join me, won't you, on this tour of delights and magic as we talk about speech and music perception. I mentioned in a previous video that I'm going to try to do a little bit of a music demo in the second half of this. I got my guitar back here. I tried to hook my MIDI keyboard up for this just so I could give you an array of sounds, different timbre, as we talked about in chapters 9 and 10, some different timbre for your musical palette, but I only have so many USB connectors, and it was either I get rid of the stylus, or I have and I use the keyboard, or I use the stylus and not the keyboard. And I felt like the stylus would be a little bit more helpful so that I can draw pictures and things like that on this. So it's just going to be the guitar today. If you want to hear more of the music that I do, and I know that you don't because I'm a very uncool professor, you can actually find us on YouTube. Some of the professors in the PSYC program are in this band called Joe, spelled the French way, Jeaux. If you search for that on YouTube, you can find some of our stuff. That's just a quick shout out because I don't know, it's fun. It's a fun thing to do that's not work related. Okay, so enough about personal stuff. Let's get into it. So we're talking about chapter 11. I got a couple of videos for you. We're going to be looking at each of these today within the video. So you don't need to click on these necessarily from your own notes, but they are embedded in there in case you want to use them. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I want to talk about speech production. So in other words, how speech is made. And this is kind of a weird place to start this chapter because talking isn't really sensation or perception, is it? Right? Like, that's just a behavior. That's just something that you are doing. That's just communication. It's not really, part of our sensory system. So why are we talking about it? Really, the reason why we're talking about it is because this big idea that I want you to take away from this chapter, which is that speech perception is not just audio, that we also integrate visual cues for speech, but really for any kind of auditory stimulus. We tend to use visual cues in order to perceive and to interpret what it is that we are detecting. Speech, this happens all the time. And it happens at the lips, obviously. Whenever you're thinking about or perceiving what someone is saying, we usually try to make eye contact, but if we're not making eye contact, you might look at someone's lips, right? So that's why we're starting here with how do we produce speech, because that's going to inform us about how we perceive it. So whenever we are creating speech, generally what we are doing is that we are expelling air out of our lungs with our diaphragm. Our diaphragm is pushing the base of the bottom of our lungs. It's going to push that air out as we are speaking. That air is going to go through your vocal folds in your larynx, and then after it goes out of there, it goes through your mouth. And then once it goes through your mouth, there's a couple of different things that can happen that are all going to possibly influence what, not just what sounds are coming out of our mouth, but for the receiver of that message, certain visual cues that they can use to maybe try to guess what you were saying. So at the larynx, air is going to come out of those vocal folds. For children, these are high. The reason why children's voices are high pitched is because, generally speaking, these vocal folds are very small. As we get older, they get thicker, they get longer, and so they become lower pitched. All right, so let's. Here's kind of a cutaway diagram of a human's face, and luckily it's a cartoon because it would be disgusting if it were anatomically accurate. But yeah, so basically we are pushing on this diaphragm that is going to expel the air out of your face, essentially. And there are a couple of key areas that I want us to focus on, and they are mostly going to be in this region right here, in your mouth. So I want you to be thinking, and you don't have to label this for an exam or for a quiz, so don't get hung up too much on that. But what I want us to be thinking about are the palates up here, the lips over here, and the tongue. So the soft palate, if you can you can feel your tongue press up, in the back of your mouth, that's your soft palate. If we move a little bit further towards your teeth right over here, that's what we're going to call the alveolar ridge. I'm just going to label it ridge right here. And then after that, we got our lips. And so the way that we create sounds is going to deal with these areas and how much air we are going to let through those areas. So let me give you an example. And the book kind of talks about this in 3 different categories of how we articulate things. So the first question is, where is airflow obstructed in as it is leaving your mouth? So, and that's known as the place of articulation. So it could be at the lips, and that's true for phonemes of B, P, and M. And when I say phonemes, if you don't know what I mean here, a phoneme is just a unit of sound that is created from a speaker. I think of it as like a syllable, essentially. So at the lips, B, P, and M, and for all of these, I would encourage you to kind of like sound these out yourself, because whenever I was learning about this and reading it, I didn't understand any of it until I started doing it, until I started practicing it. So a B, you can feel that airflow stopping at your lips, B, right? You can even feel your lips moving to stop that airflow. At the alveolar ridge, so what the hell is the alveolar ridge? I know he just told me, but it was on the previous slide and I can't go back. Think about D, T, or N. And if you say those out loud, you can feel where your tongue is going to be stopping that airflow right behind your teeth. D, T, and N. And then the soft palate. We got G, K, and Ung. And you can feel your tongue again stopping the airflow, but now much further back in your mouth. The fat part of your tongue pressing up against the soft palate to pronounce that G sound. Then the second question is, well, what about the manner of articulation? How much airflow is actually being obstructed? It could be like for B, where you have it totally obstructed. Whenever you sound out a B, your lips are totally closing your mouth. D, whenever you're doing that, you can feel the air stop whenever you're pronouncing D. G, before, like we were saying, G, you can feel it stopping there. Let's look at the others. Partially obstructed now. So sound out one of these. S for an S, or Z for a Z, or F for an F. All of those, you can feel some of those sounds. You can feel some of the air leave. It gives it that sibilance. That I always think, well, it's called sibilance. I always think of it as like the S sound that escapes into a microphone. You know this if you ever tried to record anything and you get a lot of like really like it's because you have some airflow partially obstructed. So some of that air is getting out and getting into your microphone and making it all distorted and nasty sounding. And then we have blocked at the mouth, and you can kind of again feel where this is for an N, for an M, and for an Ung. Then finally we got vocal cords. Are they vibrating or are they not? And so if you put your hand on your throat, you can definitely feel this. It's gonna be vibrating for pretty much everything you say, but check out what happens whenever you pronounce B. You can even feel your vocal cords vibrating when you go B, or M, or Z, or L. Versus, now try with P, or S, or Ch. You can feel you can feel the air come out, but you do not feel that same kind of vibration of your vocal cords like you do for these other questions, or for these other phonemes. All right, so this is going to bring us now to, and hopefully, again, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that speech perception is going to be both audio and visual. Is it possible for you to understand someone without looking at them? Yes, obviously you can. But if you're really trying to understand what someone's saying, usually it helps to be able to see them saying it, right? That's part of the reason why, like, People love watching podcasts now, which is so funny because it used to be that they were essentially just like hour-long radio shows, right? And then now it's like now you just sit and watch people talk. But we like watching people talk because it's easier to perceive their speech whenever we do that. So this brings us to a really complex issue in speech perception, which is called coarticulation. And coarticulation is the problem in which we speak very, very quickly. We speak faster than our biology really has prepared us to speak. And some biologists and anthropologists may get upset with me for saying that, but I don't know. I'm right. I'm right about this. Because, well, actually, I'm going to backpedal a little bit because it really depends on how you define your terms. But anyways, so basically what I mean here is that whenever I am saying something, whenever anybody is saying anything, of any language actually, that we talk and we talk and we talk, and that as we finish one word, so we can even just use this sentence right here. Whenever I finish the word we, my mouth is already preparing to say the word speak. We speak. We speak very quickly, right? That's very different than if I said we speak very, very quickly, right? In that case, I did stop and I did pause so that every phoneme kind of stood out on its own. But that's not how we normally talk, right? And that's not how native speakers of any tongue talk. That we all kind of talk, and as we speak, we are preparing for the next syllable that we're going to be pronouncing, and that syllable that's coming up is going to get a little bit of that previous sound that we just said. So whenever I say we speak very slowly, and if I were to look at the waveform of that, I'm going to see some of the we getting into the SP of this phrase. And if I were to just try to isolate we, it's probably going to sound more like this, like we's, because I'm getting ready to pronounce the next syllable here. So this is called coarticulation. We are essentially trying to articulate multiple things at once, and that's why I said that we speak faster than what our biology really is prepared for us to do. Another way to think about this is that our hardware has a tough time keeping up with the software. In other words, the hardware being our mouths, it has a hard time keeping up with our mind and how quickly we communicate. All that stuff is very fleshy, right? It's very inelegant. Your tongue is a giant, clumsy muscle, right? It can't keep up with talking, and this is in the past been a huge problem for speech recognition software. And depending on your age, you may be quite aware of this because for the longest time, growing up, if I spoke into a recorder, like a recording, computers could not recognize what you would say. And this was true for a long, long, long time. And it wasn't really, I think, until I should have looked up some dates. I'm going to say maybe 2010, maybe 2012, that speech recognition software got really, really good. And I would say kind of one of the big leaps in this in terms of bringing it mainstream for consumers was Siri. Some of you may have Siri on your phones right now. But basically, computers were very lousy at being able to recognize what people were saying. Why is that? It's really because what computers were using to analyze what we were saying was just the waveform. It was just the sound wave. And as I tried to articulate here, is that you can't just go off the sound wave, because if you do, this we doesn't look like we whenever I'm saying we speak very closely. It's going to look more like this sentence actually is going to look more like it's going to look like we speak very quickly, or something like that, right? Does not look like English at all. And so if you're just looking at the sound wave there, a computer would in the past would get very, very confused and not know how to recognize those sound waves, unless you spoke very deliberately to try to reduce some of that. Now, all that stuff is in the long distance past, because computers are very good at recognizing speech now, because computers are able to solve coarticulation the same way that you are, which is that they now know the language. The reason why coarticulation is not a problem for you is because you know the language, and you know the rises and falls of speech. You know what words are likely to follow others, and what phonemes are likely to follow others as well. I'm not going to be able to do it here with while I'm recording, but if you want to, here's a quick app for your browser where you can record yourself talking, and watch what happens whenever you just talk, and even actually subtitles on this lecture, for example. Whenever I speak very quickly, there's a good chance that there's going to be issues with the subtitles as I speak faster and faster. Throw a hip hop song where you got an MC who is really fast and try to do automatic subtitles, then it's not going to look like anything, right? It's probably going to be very, very bad at recognizing what that person is saying. But if you speak very slowly, even if it's the same words, it gets better at doing that, and that's because of coarticulation. So here, and as we're talking about waves and how they're represented with sound waves, these are called formants. So a formant is essentially what you're looking at right here. And what a formant is a combination of the harmonic spectrum of a sound wave versus the natural rises and falls of that sound wave as it's kind of moving through air. So it's kind of like a way to document that displacement, way to document that quote-unquote energy there. So what we're looking at right here are a series of formants, right? So like this is an example of formant for this W, this is an example of a formant for that E, and so on and so forth. So what you're looking at right here is the sentence, "We were away a year ago." Very easy sentence. I say "we were away a year ago," and you know what I'm saying. But if you were to look at the formants of it, if you were to look at the graphical representation of that displacement of these sound waves, this is what it looks like. And so you can see why this would present a problem for somebody trying to recognize the patterns here. So let's say that you can't see any of this down here, and you're trying to figure out what someone is saying just by looking at this, right? Well, where are the common phonemes? If we are looking, we know that the word "we," let me see, let's do the W's. That the word W, like we're trying to find that as in this pattern of words. So here's the format for a W. Check it out. That's what it looks like. Now let's look at the other W's in this sentence. So we got this W. It looks kind of different actually. What about this W? This W looks okay. It looks similar to these others, but even still, these three W's look different. They all look different from one another. But why? Well, this W is starting out from nowhere. It has no other phoneme feeding into it. But this one for were, "we were away," you can even see where the beginning part of that sound is picking up off of the exit of that E. Okay, but let's take a look at the other, let's go with the Y's. So way over here, so we got a Y over here, and you can see what that Y looks like versus this Y. Very, very different, right? Those look like very, very different formants. If I were to look at E's, I'm going to erase all this again. So this E, you can see how it kind of rises up in frequency. It gets a little bit higher pitched. But for this E, it doesn't get nearly as high pitched. For this E, is kind of the same. For this E over here, this E looks more like this one over here. So even though we have the same letters, those same letters look very, very different across the spectrogram. And so, again, if you were a computer and you couldn't understand this language, try to look at this formant, the spectrogram, and try to isolate the formants, right? Try to isolate each of these pieces, and then try to figure out what they mean, like what these letters are. You can see how it would get very, very tough for a computer, and why it would be really hard for us to be able to do that. The trick is that we know the language. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move over now to, if you look at the videos in the beginning of the slides, it says the McGurk effect. That's what we're going to look at right now. It's one of my favorite things that I'm going to show you all semester. All right, so the McGurk effect, all you need to do is listen or watch the screen, listen, and tell me what sound you do. So try it yourself. And disable subtitles. I don't know what subtitles are going to do. It's probably not going to be right. So you might want to disable subtitles because they're not saying an actual word here. You're supposed to listen to the phoneme and tell me what phoneme it is.
Ba 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 ba.
Okay, so what did you hear? You can rewind it if you want to. Most people hear B-A, B-A, B-A. They hear ba, 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 ba. So if you got that right, congratulations. This was the easiest one. It's going to get maybe a little bit trickier. So tell me again, what do you think you hear?
Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you what the sound was, but I want you to maybe write it down somewhere. So we're going to go through 3 of these. So maybe for number 1, maybe you heard B-A, B-A, B-A. So ba, ba, ba. For number 2, what did you hear? What did you hear in that one? Write it down somewhere. We'll compare our notes in a minute. Here's the 3rd one.
Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba.
Okay, again, 3rd one, write that down. Okay, so I don't know what you heard for 2 and 3, but was this weird? I remember whenever I first watched this in a psychology class, I remember thinking like, there's something off about this, but I can't quite say what it is. It just feels weird that he's looking at me all dead-eyed saying this. So yeah, I'll let the rest of the video play out.
Ba, 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 ba. Ba 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 ba.
Okay, so what you're seeing now is you're seeing the first guy, the second guy, and the third guy. And you're hearing the exact same thing, right? It's the same, it's just one sound for all 3 of these. And that is because for most of you, you may not have realized in the first half of this video, you were only ever hearing B-A, B-A, B-A over and over and over again. That's all you heard. That was the only audio there was. And I can even go back. Check this out. I'm going to go back and play them all again. What I want you to do this time, actually, I'm going to play through this. This is going to sound weird. Don't look at the screen. So turn your head. Don't look at the screen. Just listen.
Ba 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 ba.
All right, I'm hearing
ba,
B.
Ba,
Oops, sorry, I didn't rewind it.
Ba ba.
All right, here. This is the first one.
Ba 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 ba.
Okay, and if you weren't looking at the screen, it doesn't matter. You should still hear B-A, 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 ba, ba. Now, again, let's not look at the screen again, and we're going to have the second head, the second guy, the second phoneme.
Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba.
And again, that is the same exact audio that we just heard. For the third one, again, don't look at the screen.
Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba.
Okay, so essentially what this video has done is it has taken 3 different pronunciations where this guy is pronouncing a word. The first time, he is pronouncing the word ba, B-A, B-A. So that is congruent. That is correct. The second video, he's not actually saying that. If you look at his lips, and let's rewind here. So take note of, this time, just look at the lips.
Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba.
All right, so even though I've seen this video 100 times, and even though I've taught this class several times, when I look at his mouth and I hear that phoneme, B-A-B-A, I hear something that sounds more like V, like a V, or like an F. It doesn't sound like B-A-B-A. Here's the third one.
Ba ba, ba ba, ba ba, ba ba, ba ba, ba ba.
And I definitely hear V-A, V-A, V-A on this. Va, va. Even though I know, again, that the audio is exactly the same. And so what's fun about this now is that I'm going to let this play through the end now. Is just look at each of these guys, spend a little bit of time, look at the first one, think about what you hear. Look at the second one, look at his mouth, see what you hear. Look at the third one, look at his mouth, and see if you feel like it changes.
Ba ba, 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 ba ba.
Okay, it's funny because whenever I was looking at this, I was thinking that that this was the first video over here on the left, and I was like, man, when I'm looking at him, I still hear VA, and it is because his mouth is not pronouncing VA. It is not pronouncing BA. It is pronouncing VA. So this guy's pronouncing a V sound, this guy's pronouncing a D sound, and this guy's pronouncing a B sound. And yet, for most people, if you are watching them say these phonemes, we perceive those phonemes to be different, depending on the visual aspect of it. So this is a great example of how visual information can interfere with audio information. For the most part, it's going to help us out. For the most part, having that visual information is helpful. It gives us additional context and clues to be able to understand what someone is saying. But every now and again, you might have something like this where it actually throws you off your game. All right, so speech perception is categorical. This is another really complex, tricky thing for this chapter, one of the trickiest. And this is one of those things where at the beginning of the semester I warned you. I was like, if you're going to use ChatGPT to answer some of the stuff, you got to be careful, because this is one of those that ChatGPT loves to screw up, and usually it's pretty obvious if somebody's using it because their answer makes no sense whenever I get it on an exam. So basically, speech is categorical. What does that mean? Basically, it means that whenever we hear something, we hear one interpretation of it. We don't hear multiple interpretations of this. I think of this kind of very similar to when we talked about grouping sounds in chapter 10, and about how, like, whenever we are in an auditorium and we have sound coming from all over the place, we don't hear it as coming from all over the place. We hear it as one singular sound, right? So we group that together and we perceive it as one thing instead of a dozen different sound waves. Speech perception is a little bit similar, where we have what could be multiple interpretations of a phoneme or of a sound, and yet we just go with one. We only hear one. So what you are looking at right here is I love this figure, but it is not intuitive at all, so I'm going to break it down. What you're looking at right here on the y-axis is how often someone was correctly able to discriminate a sound. So over here, they were like, we want you to press a button whenever you hear the word ba. Or just tell us whenever you hear the word ba. Or actually, it'll be it'll be easier if I phrase this a little bit differently. We could just say, like, if someone says ba and that's correct, then we're getting 100% over here. If they say da and that's correct, looks like we got 100% over here. If they think they hear ga and that's correct, then they got 100% over here. But what the researchers did, and so you can see this very easy, right? Because people are getting 100% on a lot of this stuff. But the trick here is that the researchers went in and they got a sound of ba and a sound of da, so these two separate sounds, and they use computers to blend them together. So at this point right here in the middle, you're hearing the perfect mix between ba and da. So people, whenever they hear this, should maybe say, I think I hear a mix of ba and da. Maybe they would hear ba-da or da-ba or something like that. But that's not what happens. What actually happens is that people will only hear ba or they'll only hear da. So they only hear one or the other. And that's what categorical speech perception is. That it's not the case that we hear both or a combination. We either hear one or the other, or our brain only interprets one of those competing pieces. And so you can see over here how these formants were slightly changed. So this is a ba sound. This is a da sound. Excuse me, and this is a ga sound. And so you can see how they look slightly different, right? So the ba looks very different from the da, and the da looks different from the ga. But as we tweak these sounds, so this right here looks maybe a little bit more like da than it does ba, right? But people will say that they either hear ba or da. They don't say that they hear both. Now, this is still a little bit hard to make sense of. I think maybe it's easier to think about this visually. So with vision, if I were to, be a mad scientist and like take this monkey and through some horrific experiments mutate it into a cow, if I asked you what this is, you would say a monkey. If I asked you what this down here is, you would say a cow. If I asked you what this right here is, what would you say? Or maybe better yet, if I asked you what this right here is, what would you say? You probably wouldn't say, oh, that's a monkey, or, oh, that's a cow. You'd probably say, that's a freak of nature. Like, you'd say, like, that seems like it's a combination of things, or a mixture of things. And you'd say the same thing for this, too. You can do that visually, but verbally, or, as it relates to speech perception, that's not how we perceive things. We perceive it as either or. We'd either say that's a monkey or that is a cow. This reminds me of back at the very beginning of the semester. You may remember this little this meme that went around in 2018 where somebody, I think this came from Merriam-Webster's website, where there was a word that somebody put, I don't know if you've ever been to like those dictionary websites. It has a little button where you can have the computer pronounce it for you, and somebody found that what they heard was very different than what somebody else heard. And it was kind of like the blue and black dress in that way, where people like argued over it, I can't believe that you hear the word Yanny here. Well, I can't believe you hear the word Laurel here. How could anybody else hear anything different? And so, just to revisit this exercise, here we go. Think about what you hear.
Laurel, 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 Laurel.
All right, I apologize if you have to crank up the volume a little bit. All right, so...
Laurel, Laurel, Laurel.
I'm mostly hearing Laurel here. So, if I start with Laurel, watch, this is going to work pretty much exactly the same way, where we're going to start with Laurel, most people are going to hear Laurel, and then I'm going to pan it over until it becomes Yanny, and there will be a point where you now hear it as Yanny. But most people aren't going to hear it as a combination of both or as a mixture of both. You're going to pick one or the other. So here we go.
Laurel, 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 Laurel.
For me, it's right here.
Laurel.
Now I only hear
Laurel.
Yanny.
Laurel.
If I go back,
Laurel. Laurel. Laurel.
I only hear Laurel now.
Laurel.
All right.
Laurel. 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 Laurel.
All right. So that's basically categorical speech perception. Now, this is not something that happens all that much, right? Or at least, this kind of phenomenon where it's like this, cool little meme, this little perceptual illusion, this doesn't happen very often. But we use categorical speech perception all the time. And in fact, that is what helps us resolve coarticulation. Because if you think about coarticulation, the problem with coarticulation is just that we have so many of these phonemes that bleed together. right? So the example was like we speak, right? So with we speak, that word, we could hear, like I talked about how like that might be the first phoneme that you hear, but you're not going to hear, let me think. You're not going to hear, okay. So whenever you're saying it really fast, or just normal conversational tone, we speak, you can either hear that as, for example, we speak, or you can hear it as weesp, eek, right? We don't hear them as both. We pick one or the other, and we're generally picking one of them based on our familiarization with the language. So this is part of the reason why whenever you listen to someone speak a language that you are unfamiliar with, usually it sounds very, very fast. And the reason why it sounds very fast is because all we are hearing is coarticulation. We don't hear any of the pauses between the words, between the ideas. Just like whenever I'm speaking right now, I'm not really, I might pause a little bit between sentences, but I'm not really pausing very much between words, right? And that's because we don't have to. We speak the language. You understand it. And so as long as I'm not speaking too fast, you don't need me to stop and pronounce things. And the reason for that is because speech is categorical, in that your brain is essentially picking the interpretation and going with it, and not saying, well, it could be one or the other. He could be saying we speak, or he could be saying we speak. I don't know. All right, let's move on. So the McGurk effect, I just walked through that. The McGurk effect is a great example of categorical speech perception, because what you are doing whenever you're hearing this is that we hear it as ba or fa or da. We don't hear those phonemes as, well, it sounded like a mix of both, right? And so one of the reasons why it's unique is that it's, at least as far as I know, it is maybe the only example in psychology where you can take two perceptions, add them together, and get something completely different. So you hear one thing, you hear this, you hear ba with a B, you see ga with a G, and then you perceive da with a D. So you're getting this totally new phoneme that's neither of these here. And as far as I know, that's the only example of that in psychology. Some people have argued that flavor is an example of this, because flavor is a combination of smell and taste, but we'll talk about that later. But I don't know. To me, it feels a little bit different than that, but this is an example of how your brain is using visual cues to try to figure out what you're hearing, and then once it's decided with what you're hearing, it just goes with it, and it's like, that's what you hear. All right. So a little bit of an explanation for how this works. This came from McGurk and McDonald. I used to assign this article in our class to read, but it's old. It's 2 pages, and it's a little bit opaque. And I don't know why it's called the McGurk effect and not the McGurk and McDonald effect. I'm sure McDonald is furious. But I hope he's still with us. I think McGurk was with us until recently. Sorry, John McGurk, if you're watching this right now, I'm so sorry. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. It's not that we know each other, but I'd love to get to know you. That sounds weird, sorry. So the reason why the McGurk effect happens is because of top-down processing, and if that rings a bell, we've talked about it a little bit throughout the semester. Top-down processing is this idea that your knowledge about how perception works and how the world works, your knowledge about things, about languages, influences what you hear and what you perceive and what you see and what you feel. So, for example, this is my favorite example, actually. If we're talking about drinks, imagine that you saw a Starbucks cup and you thought it was your hot coffee, and you take a sip of it and it's room temperature coffee. In that moment, that coffee feels very cold, right? Which is interesting because it's just room temperature. but your expectation is driving your perception of that. So that's an example of top-down processing, where you're expecting one thing, and then whenever you experience it, it's slightly different than if you had no expectations whatsoever. Because if you just gave that to a baby, somebody who had never had coffee before, had no expectations about coffee, they would say that it was, not cold, not hot. It just tastes room temperature. You can think of the exact opposite with a soda, where if you get a Coke Zero, and a nice cold Coke Zero, or no, actually let's go with a beer, nice cold beer, just because I feel like warm beer is very nasty. But if you take a cold beer, you set it out, and your friend sets out a warm beer right next to it, and then you go and you take a sip of that warm beer, it feels hot. It feels bad. It feels hot. And yet, it's the same temperature as that Starbucks that has been sitting out all day. They're both room temperature, but your expectations for it has changed. Same thing is true for the McGurk effect. This is an example of how your expectations are influencing what you are perceiving. And the reason for that is because we see how the mouth is moving. We know, okay, well, in the previous example where you hear with your ear, the audio is ba, but the visuals, the guy is saying ga, and that gives us this third phoneme of da that we are perceiving. We're looking at that and we're like, okay, well, it can't be ba, because we see that the mouth isn't puckering up, it's not completely obstructing the airflow at the lips, But it can't be ga, because it doesn't really sound like ga. So it has to be something else, and I guess the only outcome to that would be da. So this is an example of how quickly the brain is resolving these conflicts, and is doing, using categorical speech perception to do that. All right, this kind of an interesting tidbit here. There are age differences with the McGurk effect, and that's because it happens with adults. It does not happen with children. Why? Because children don't have enough time in their lives, at that point, to be able to understand looking at someone's mouth and being able to kind of predict what they're going to say based on the formation of their lips and how their jaws are moving. And that's one of the things that we're going to get to try for this chapter's discussion activity, where you get to do some lip reading exercises. So children, the McGurk effect doesn't happen, and it's partly because they're not very good at putting the clues together of auditory and visual. Usually they'll either say it's just the auditory, usually how it works. They just say it's just the auditory that they hear. I'm not going to spend too much time. Oh, I'll spend some time here because we have a research article about this, about the McGurk effect. So the McGurk effect, why is it that we don't just experience visual or audio? Well, it must be because, as we've learned earlier in the class, there must be some part of the brain that is going to put these together, that's going to kind of resolve these differences. And if that's true, the logic should go that if you did not have this area of the brain, then the McGurk effect shouldn't work, right? Does that make sense? Does that logic make sense? That basically, if we are saying that we know that the brain is processing the audio here and is processing the visual here, and yet our brain is putting these clues together to come up with a third phoneme, then let's find that part of the brain and let's turn it off and see what happens. And that's what these researchers did. They decided to shut off part of the brain to see if the McGurk effect would work. This brings us to the article that I have assigned for this unit, which is Beauchamp, Nath, and Passelar. A little bit of an older article, but kind of a classic. Here, they used an MRI to look at people listening to sounds, and then they scanned them again when they were looking at people talking, and then they scanned them again whenever they were listening and looking at someone talking. So basically they're getting a scan for just audio, a scan for just visual cues that we are perceiving, and then the integration of those. So basically what they did is they looked for, well, what area was active only during this condition, the hearing and seeing condition. Because, they can't just look at the seeing, because, you're going to have occipital lobe going on, and they know the occipital lobe is probably not going to be relevant here. So they were looking for the area that was only active whenever you had two or more senses going, and that area was the superior temporal sulcus. So what they did is they brought the same people back, and they took TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and they zapped that individual's brain, that part of their brain, while they were watching videos of the McGurk effect. And what they found is that whenever, because remember, the TMS is going to temporarily deactivate that area, and so while that was happening, they're watching the McGurk effect videos, and whenever that area of the brain is temporarily deactivated, people did not perceive the McGurk effect. They either only heard the sound, or they only attended to the visual stimulus, but they did not put them together. They did not integrate them. And so that's what this figure right here is showing from your from the research article. So this area, the superior temporal sulcus and the temporal lobe. There's so much data here. I got to unpack it all. So the white bar right here, this is the control condition essentially, where they did not apply any transcranial magnetic stimulation, and you can see here on the y-axis how often did they perceive that third syllable that wasn't actually there, that da, that fusion of the visual and the auditory means. And so whenever there is no TMS, people were perceiving that most of the time. Whenever they turned on the TMS device, you can see it drops to essentially chance level. Now, at this point, people are just guessing, right? They don't know. They're just guessing. Because now they don't have the ability to really integrate those sounds together. And then we have this control condition. This is a slightly different control condition where instead of using TMS on the superior temporal sulcus, they zapped a nearby area. I want to say it was a little bit further back around this region over here. And what they found is like, hey, it didn't make a difference. That performance on the two control conditions were pretty much the same. And they did that just to show that, like, oh, it's not just that TMS is like ruining people's ability to perceive language. That people can still perceive language when they have the TMS in a different area. It's only for the superior temporal sulcus that this happens. This figure over here on the right is the exact same thing, exact same experiment. They just used different syllables just to control for, that it wasn't specific to these syllables over here. So they had essentially two different stimuli sets. Then we got over here, this is showing the time course of it. So they even kind of manipulated when TMS occurred. And you can see like right here, 0 would be like as the sound is beginning. And so whenever people have TMS applied, whenever the sound is beginning, that's whenever accuracy drops at its lowest. If you were to zap somebody 300 milliseconds before that played, it does not affect their behavior. If you do it 200 milliseconds before, it doesn't affect their behavior. If you do it 200 milliseconds afterwards, it does affect it a little bit, but after 300 milliseconds, it's back to normal. So within a fraction of a second, the effect's already gone. All right, so that's research quiz number 3. I hope that was a helpful kind of guide to it for those of you that haven't started it yet. It might be a nice way to kind of know what to expect before you get to reading. And this is kind of what this is showing is just a reiteration of what I was already saying, that speech is more than just audio, that it not only is perceiving visual information, but it's also reliant on what we know about language and how often we've been exposed to it. So there's a lot of things that go into speech perception. The next thing that we're going to be looking at is how we learn that speech perception. Okay, so babies learn, this should say learn to listen. Babies learn to listen before they are even born. So I was surprised by this actually, because I thought it was maybe superstition whenever someone's pregnant, and then like you'll hear people say like, oh, I sang to my baby, or I was talking to my baby and they kicked back or whatever, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds cute, that's really cool, but I don't really buy it. I don't think that babies can actually hear that stuff whenever they're in the womb. But no, they can. I was totally wrong about that. Which is maybe why men like me shouldn't be pretending to know everything about pregnancies. If you know what I mean, and I think that you do. Basically, what people found is that, and they did this by testing newborn infants, and I mean like within 48 hours testing infants for their ability to recognize certain sounds. And what they found is that newborns are sensitive to different speakers. That if you had the mother's voice pronouncing something and another similar voice pronouncing the exact same thing at the exact same volume and the exact same pitch, that babies will look at the mother's voice. They will look at the voice they heard all throughout the pregnancy. So, and that's even if the two were never in the room physically together after the after the birth. So, newborns are able to, babies that are yet to be born are able to learn. They are able to hear and to listen and to learn the differences between someone's vocal patterns, which is, I don't know, to me extremely surprising. But more than that, it's not just that they can learn the sound. They also seem to learn certain pieces about the language as well. In this, there was a study that was done in France. They took French babies that were how do I phrase this? They took babies that were birthed out of French mothers. Does that make sense? So basically, French lady, she's pregnant, she's part of a study, she has the baby, and then 4 days later, they play different languages for these babies. And what they find is that the babies that were raised in a French environment, so during pregnancy they were in a French environment where they may have heard the French language a lot, that those babies are going to be sensitive to the French language versus the Russian language. That they are going to attenuate they're going to look at the French speaking speaker versus the Russian. And it's not because France is a romance language and is appealing, and it's not because Russian can be very guttural and can have some hard glottal stops and things like that. So it's not that one of these languages is more pleasant than the other or whatever. It's just that these babies seem to have learned something about sound and something about communication and speech way before they're able to demonstrate it, way before they're able to say it, way before, because how long does it take for babies to speak? Like 18 months or something like that? It takes quite a while. They're able to learn language way before that, way before they can show it. All right. So, this early experience is going to affect how we produce languages as well. And you may have recognized this in people that have heavy accents. That people that, like let's say they lived in France for their whole life, and then they came over to America, and they maybe have some difficulty pronouncing certain sounds, right? That's common. That's common for every language. And it's partly because as we grow up listening to a language, we learn a lot about that language, but we might miss out on some of the sounds that other languages have that are quite common. So, for example, in Spanish, there is a rolling R that is not really in English. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because you were in Spanish class in 11th grade, and Miss Contreras would say, like, all right, now say thank you in Spanish, and everybody in the class says, gracias. And Miss Contreras is like, no, say gracias. And like, and I didn't even do it then. And they were like, and then your classmates are like, yeah, gracias. It's like, no, it's gracias, where you gotta like roll the tongue a little bit. We don't have the English language words that really have that, right? And so it's hard for English speakers to learn Spanish later in life because we don't hear that rolling R the same way that a native Spanish speaker does. We see the same thing with the L and the R sounds in Japanese as well. That people that grew up and have reached adulthood only ever hearing Japanese, whenever they come to America, they might have an issue not exactly just saying it, but being able to pick up on the subtle differences that an L might make because they don't have those same phonemes in that specific language. And there are tons of examples of this, by the way. I'm not just trying to single out English speakers or Spanish speakers or Japanese speakers. So, I feel like maybe an example for Spanish would be like the J sound, right? Like that's a hard sound because there's not really, you don't see it or you don't hear it nearly as much in Spanish as you do here. And so a lot of native Spanish speakers, if they come to, if they try to learn English later in life, have trouble hitting that hard J sound, and we usually pronounce it with a soft J because soft J is much more common in Spanish language. This happens, as you might expect, at an extremely early age, and this is called statistical learning. Statistical learning is, and if you took my cognitive psychology class, we talk about it there too. If you took a developmental psychology class, you probably took it there as well, or you probably learned about it there as well. Statistical learning is not about learning about statistics. It's not about learning about the mean, the median, and the mode, or standard deviation, or chi-square, or the Mahalanobis distance, or the Wilk-Shapiro test, or the exploratory factor analysis, or the structural equation modeling, or Markov chains. It's not about any of those things. Any of those stats concepts that you hate, that you learned about, and that you learned that you hate them. And actually, it's all about how likely some sounds are to follow others. That's it. It's all about like how likely are these sounds to occur. And this does feed back into coarticulation, because you may remember when I was talking about coarticulation, I said that we get really good at learning what syllables are going to follow certain ones and which ones aren't going to follow certain ones. This is why Siri has gotten so much better at understanding speech, is because computers are now able to kind of guess what we're going to say. And you already know this because you see it with your text features. It always recommends text for you, right? Your AI model will be like, you said what's. I'm going to assume you're going to say up next, right? So if you're a baby, you're going to hear people say, what's up, right? So you might know that what, like what's, like these two, and this is not really a great example because these are not clearly divided phonemes, but and up, that those can sometimes go together. It'd be much rarer to find, let's say, this, recrow, right? Even saying it sounds weird. Recrow, right? Sounds strange. Sounds like it's a different language, right? And that's because in English there is not very many words that start with a w sound and then that syllable is followed by cr. That just doesn't happen very much. We learn this really earlier than you might think, because this is a very cerebral thing that I'm pointing out here, like that I'm, as I'm saying this, like, oh yes, I guess the English language doesn't have very many words. And babies don't have that, right? Babies aren't sitting around thinking like, goo goo gaga. I don't think what is going to follow or is going to precede a cr sound or whatever. That's just not how babies' minds work. They're not that present. So how are they able to do that? This was first demonstrated in Safran, Aslan, and Newport, 1996, an extremely influential article that essentially set off like a tidal wave of research in the 90s that's still going on today, and helping us understand how we achieve language. And so here is essentially what they did. So I'm going to play this for you here.
Ba bu la do bi go ku ta du ba.
You might have to crank it up.
Ku bu la do bi go ku da ti ba ta du ba bu la do da ti ba bu la do ta du ba bi go ku bu la do da ti ba bu la do ta du ba da ti ba bi go.
All right, so maybe you get it by now. Essentially what they're doing is that they're just playing a stream of nonsense that, is just a bunch of sounds, right? There weren't any actual words there. That's kind of the point. Safran, Aslan, and Newport they took a bunch of babies as participants consensually. They had the parents' permission. They ranged from ages 6 months to 8 months. They let them listen to this fake speech. So even though those words were fake that you were just listening to, they did have a certain pattern. There were some of these phonemes that did follow others and didn't follow some. So essentially, it was a artificial language, but it was a consistent one. It was one that had its own rules about what sounds follow others. And what they found is that whenever babies were tested on this later, they had babies listen to these syllables, and that whenever babies heard words that followed that artificial language, the babies didn't care. But if they had a pair of syllables that did not follow that artificial language, so like a wakro, for example. So this would be like the difference between what's up versus wakro. If you said what's up to a baby, the baby's going to kind of zone out. They're not going to care all that much because it's like, yeah, I heard that. I've heard that before. It's not anything new. And babies love new shit, right? Babies love new stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to cuss for any of you 6 month old babies that are watching this, learning about how to. I'm proud of you, babies. You found a way to log into YouTube, and you're trying to learn how to speak. You can probably find a better video than this to do that. If you were to say wakro, that baby's gonna look at you. It's like, what did you say? What? Huh? Is that something new? Because babies love new stuff, and they're always and I say they like new stuff. They're interested in new stuff because they can be very afraid of new things, as you know. But they're change detectors, just like our sensory system. They're looking for changes in their environment, and so an unfamiliar syllable pairing like this would stick out to them, and it does. And so basically, they found that whenever you have a stream of text like this, that is complete gibberish, as long as it has consistent words embedded in that gibberish, that babies can pick that out. And they can pick it out within 2 minutes. That's how fast it is. 8-month-old babies are able to pick out words and patterns out of gibberish in 2 minutes. And they do that through statistical learning, which again, statistical learning is just learning what sounds are likely to follow other sounds and what sounds are not likely to follow other sounds. All right, I'm going to set up my guitar in a second, and I'll be right back. Hey everybody, and apologize for the hiccup there. I just to let you in behind the scenes, I recorded this whole section last night, and when I went to listen after I uploaded it to YouTube, I realized you could not hear any of the guitar. So I'm going to try this again, and as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of this video, in order for me to hook up the guitar, I had to put in my audio interface, which meant I had to unplug my stylus pad. So I'm not able to write anything, but I hope that's okay. So what I want to basically do is, in the next 30 minutes, just kind of give you a broad overview of music and music perception, how we perceive music, how it rolls around in our head. And I have my trusty guitar with me to demonstrate some of those things. So let's get into it. This might seem weird to some of you, especially if you don't have a background in music. But music and math are actually very closely intertwined. And the reason why I said I think that not everybody thinks about that is because we usually think of those like almost kind of like two totally different worlds, like art versus science, But it is, and it's hard to say, exactly where this starts in terms of human history, but music is one of the oldest, most ancient ways in which we communicate with one another. Even before we learned language, we were communicating using music. And if you think about it, maybe it's not all that weird. I don't think that anybody was out there singing, Party in the USA or whatever, they weren't playing Beethoven's Fifth to one another back in caveman times, but if you think about like what music is, which is just a melody or some rhythm, well, that makes a little bit more sense, like that we communicate using music, and that you can imagine, like people using drums to communicate war, for example, or to communicate celebration, or to communicate rituals like weddings and things like that. The oldest musical instrument seems to be bone flutes that were crafted 30,000 years ago, so this is extremely old stuff. And as I mentioned about the relationship between music and math, your boy Pythagoras, you know Pythagoras, right? Nobody knows his first. I don't even know. Did he have a first name? I don't know how Greek conventions work. But he was a mathematician, or at least that's how we know him as a mathematician, because whenever you took geometry or trigonometry, you learned about his rule, the Pythagorean theorem, which is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? Where an a and b is referring to the length of a right angle, and the c is equal to the hypotenuse, the longest part of that angle. So we know about Pythagoras, but what you may not have known about him is that he was like really obsessed with music. I don't think he would think of himself as a mathematician as much as like a musicologist, and in fact, he like back in Grecian times had recruited like kind of his own little cult following, very mystical in their endeavors, where they kind of like thought that you could use music to heal the body. And while I think for some of you that might sound weird, for others it probably doesn't sound very weird, because if you go on YouTube and you like type in stuff like healing sound frequency, you're going to find a bunch of videos of like 2-hour videos of the healing frequency, 242 hertz or whatever. The stuff that swears that, like it does something to your brain, it changes through your brain frequencies or whatever. And I hate to be like such a downer and such a skeptic and such a party pooper, but there's not really any good evidence for this stuff. I know they all say that it does something to your brain, and that makes it sound really science-y, but come on, there's not any good scientific empirical evidence. But hey, if it works for you, then I'm not gonna be mean about it or whatever. But this notion that music is related to health, is related to things, it has healing properties, is a very old idea. And even older than that is the idea that we can use it to communicate with one another, which is why it's in this speech perception chapter. Now, this whole business about math being involved really has to do a lot with the frequencies at which these pitches involve themselves. And so you can see this diagram right here. It's also in your book. That goes from the lowest frequency of a piano to the highest frequency of a piano. Now, you may know that pianos have 88 keys, right? So we're looking at 88 intervals from the lowest frequency of 28 hertz, as you see here, that's an A, we'll talk about what that means in a second, over to 4186 hertz, which is a C. Okay, so that's maybe not so new to you, right? Like this notion that pitches have different frequencies. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. The lower the frequency, the lower the pitch. But what's this business about these letters? As you can see here, we go from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it starts all over again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it starts all over again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that's true for American pianos. It's true for British pianos. It's true for Spanish pianos. It's true for Russian pianos. It's true for Japanese pianos. It's true for almost every piano that you can imagine. And the reason why I'm phrasing it like that is because this scheme of A, B, C, D, E, F, G is a Western scale. That is a Western mode of music that most of the world is kind of adopted, but not all of them. And in fact, we'll talk about a couple of exceptions to that later on. So I don't have my piano with you, right? I showed you my MIDI keyboard. Poor thing doesn't have enough USB ports right now while I'm recording for me to play piano, which is okay. I'm not great on piano. Might be one of my worst instruments, to be honest with you. Guitar is not my best instrument either. But let me give you a quick demo of what I mean by A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So this span right here, you can see that this is the range of the guitar. So we're going down from an E of 82 hertz all the way up to what is that? And I can't tell if that's an F or an E of 659, 698, whatever. So if you're curious about what these things mean, I'm going to crank up my guitar and play a little bit for you. So the lowest note on the guitar, I'll try to play it so you can see it, is this, an open E. It is this thickest string at the top of the fretboard, and I'm playing it without pressing it. So that's the lowest note. The highest note, I'm gonna guess, oh, that's horrible, but that's what it is. I'm not gonna play that very much. But here we're going from E upwards, so this is what that means. So this is E, this is F, this is G, A, B, C, D, and then back to E. And that's it. That is the cycle from A to B. You probably learned this already before, and you may not even have known what it was called, because at least whenever I learned about it, we called it like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? Like, if you've learned that, that is essentially a way of expressing this loop. And it is a loop, because what happens is that as you go from this A, let's say, as an example, we're going from this A to this A, we're going to cycle through all these different, what we're going to call tone chromas, these different notes, and then we're going to end back on A. But what exactly does that mean? Let me show you. So if I'm going to start with A, so this is going to be like 110 hertz. So A, and I'm going to basically hit enough notes until I get back up to A again. Here we go. Okay, so basically I moved up from A to A. I moved from 110 hertz up to 220 hertz. Now the interesting thing about this is that those notes are actually, they're different frequencies, but they sound very similar. So here's what I mean. I'm going to play you an extreme example where I'm going to play an A on one string and then an A on a different higher string. So they're going to be different pitches, but they're going to be the same tone chroma. So take a listen. Alright, so those are both A's. Now, you may ask, like, well, I guess they sound a little different, though. You said they sound the same. Okay, well, let me show you how a different note sounds when compared to that. So I'm going to play just one fret away from that high A. So I'm going to do A again. Now watch what happens when I hit a different note. Do you hear how those other notes just sound so much different than the other one? And that's because they have different tone chroma. That difference is just referring to the note. And as you move higher and higher or lower and lower, it repeats itself. Now, one quick note, as you may have noticed, and we talked about this a little bit in chapter 9, that this A right here, 110 hertz, whenever we go back up to the next A is 220 hertz. Well, guess what happens if you go up to the next A? I'm going to go up to the next A. There it is, 440 hertz. What do you think the next A is going to be? If you look at the pattern here, there is a pattern. We're doubling each time we go. So the next A is going to be 880 hertz, and that is beyond what I can play on guitar. It's too high pitched. So they cycle through like this. We're going to revisit this idea again in just a little bit, but that is tone chroma in a nutshell. Now, what you see down here is a fun look at the audibility curve from chapter 9. What we're looking at here is the frequencies of how high pitched something is versus how loud does it need to be in order for you to hear it. And we can demonstrate this on guitar as well. So even though this is meant for a piano, if you've ever been around a piano and you hit the lowest key, what happens? It's hard to hear. You have to really hit it in order for you to be able to hear it, which is reflected here, where basically in order for us to be able to perceive that really low A, it needs to be a very high volume. As we get higher pitched, that begins to drop until we get to a point where it peaks back up at these extreme pitches. So what I'm going to play right here for you now, just to demonstrate this, is I'm going to play a really low E, the lowest E that I got, and then I'm going to play a much higher note, and I want you to tell me if one of them is louder than the other. So here we go, the lowest note versus a higher note. It's not even the highest note, and at least I'm not even listening to the playback on the video, which I actually hope is recording this time. But yeah, the second set of notes were way louder, right? I was plucking them at exactly the same intensity. It's just that one of those notes is much more audible. It's in this range that is a little bit easier to hear compared to this lower E. All right, so let's talk a little bit about chords. Let's talk a little about octaves and how those work. So whenever frequencies have that ratio where they are either doubled or halved, they sound alike. And so a middle C has a frequency of this, 261 hertz, and then if you were to move one octave up or one octave down, it's going to sound similar even though it is at a different pitch. And the reason why I think this is so interesting is because check this out, where like, again, I'm just going to be playing, well, I'm talking about C, so let me do some C's here. So here's a lower C versus a higher one. Especially when they're played together like that, you really get the sense that they kind of quote-unquote resonate, they kind of go together. We'll come back to that in a second. But you can see what happens if I play a different note just like that. That sounds bad. And what about this one? Yeah, I'm not feeling it. But the thing that I love about this is that, so I'm playing this note right here, and if I play a note that has a very similar frequency, so we're moving to a nearby frequency. I'm going to move over to the next note. So those sound kind of different compared to how those sound so much more similar. So the reason why that's fun is because even though that C sharp that I played would be closer to this 261 hertz, it doesn't sound like if we had just doubled this frequency. By doubling it or by halving it, it sounds a lot more than if we moved to the neighboring adjacent notes. And so whenever people talk about Mariah Carey having a really, or whoever your favorite singer is, having a really large or really high range, usually what they're referring to is how many cycles can they go through. Can they go from that A to the next A and then to the next A? That would be 3 whole octaves of sound, which you can see here, where if we move from A to the next A, we essentially will have to stop by or bypass all of these other lower notes to get to this octave up, and then we just do the same thing. It's this spiral, this helix pattern. And they try to color code the sounds so that you can kind of see that, you know, even though we're getting higher pitch, that what repeats itself is the tone. So as we increase that pitch, we're going to cycle through all of these all these intermediary notes. All right, so chords. Chords are a little bit hard to explain because what we're talking about now is playing more than one note. I think by definition it has to be 3 or more notes. But you play 3 or more notes, and that makes a chord. But a chord that is consonant is going to sound different than a chord that is dissonant. And it gets really hard to talk about what that difference is. So a consonant chord is, as the book says, has ratios that are usually, if you know, whenever you divide them together, it gives you a nice even remainder, or it doesn't give you a remainder, it divides evenly. So the ratios are really nice, but I don't know what that means. That doesn't tell you anything about how it sounds. I think that, and this is part of the reason why I brought the guitar, is because I feel like it's much easier to note the difference whenever you hear it. So here's an example of a consonant chord. This is a G chord. Here we go. Was that right? Yeah. How pretty. So here is a consonant chord where I'm going to play very similar notes, but maybe just I'm going to add one. I'm just going to move one note. Ooh. How different that sounds compared to consonant versus dissonant. All right. So basically, consonant chords inform most of the music that we listen to. Most people don't really mess around with dissonant chords unless they're playing jazz, sometimes when they're playing blues, or if they are avant-garde experimental. If you learn about serialism in your music class, you'll probably remember that. I think it was called serialism, where they tried to reinvent the scale, essentially, the Western scale. So that was one chord. That was a G chord. My buddy in college, I'm not going to say his name, I did not do any drugs in college at all, except for caffeine, really. I didn't even really drink, even though I was legal. I just never been into it. But not all my friends felt that way. And I had one friend, I'm not going to say his name, but I remember he called us into his room and he was like, "Have y'all ever heard this chord? Listen to that. It's the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life." And then he played that for about 30 minutes. And that is why you shouldn't do cocaine. Is probably bad for your health, but more than that, it makes you annoying. But here's another example of a chord. This is a D. And that's a consonant version. If we wanted to screw it up, and all I did is shifted down one. So like I moved from this and I'm shifting down, and that sounds bad. Not only does it sound bad, it sounds unresolved. That is usually the phrase that people use to describe that, which is why you hear it in horror movies or in elements of suspense to kind of leave you on the edge. You're waiting for that sound to kind of resolve. You're waiting for it to go from this to this. You're waiting for it to kind of slide back up. Or at least that's the theory. If you want to learn more about this, I have this link right here for you that kind of outlines this stuff, but really, if you're interested in it, take a music theory class. Westfield offers some, and I think it might even count for your core curriculum. So it's kind of a win-win. All right. Here is an example of some of the way these notes fit together. So let me just look at this example for a second. So we got a G, a B, and a D. Let me play those together. A G, a B, and a D. So that would sound like almost like a regular G chord. That doesn't sound bad. Sounds all right. And whenever you hear musicians talk about the first, the third, and the fifth chord, usually what they're referring to is the relationship that these notes have with one another. So, for example, if I'm talking about the third and the fifth chord, that would be like if I'm starting here at G, that's the first chord. And then if I'm following the scale, the second note of that scale is that. Don't want that, but I do want the third one, which is that. So I'm playing. And then I'm going to go up to the fifth. So that's the third, the fifth, the fourth is that, and then the fifth is this, is at D. Those sound nice, right? Those notes sound like they go together. Versus if we were to do, that doesn't sound too bad, but this does. Again, it sounds a little bit unresolved. I'm playing around here, and I realized, I think that this is a very popular song from the 80s by the Violent Femmes. I don't know. You figure it out. I can play Sweet Home Alabama. Because you have to whenever you are born and raised in the Southeast, because you hear that more than the Pledge of Allegiance growing up. All right, I think I'm pretty much done with this, though. Am I done with this? I think so. All right. I want to talk to you a little bit about cultural differences in music now. Actually, I am going to have to reach back and grab that in just 1 second. But there are cultural differences in music. We know this partly because we know that different cultures use different instruments, right? That you'll see traditional instruments from different cultures, and you're like, oh, what is that? It's a Suzuki. Okay, well, what is that? Or that's a didgeridoo or whatever. So yes, that does exist. But more than that, there are some cultures that perceive music differently, that they have kind of different systems for it. And probably the most prominent or the most widely studied is in Indonesia. In Indonesia, which is Javanese, they have a totally different scale. And in fact, instead of having a scale that goes is 8 notes moving from one octave to the next octave, they have scales that have, I believe, 6 notes instead of 8. So essentially, when we go from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, like that, they would have like those intervals are different. Those intervals are a little bit bigger between the notes. So there are fewer notes within that octave, and so that means, you have a little bit more leeway in what qualifies as that note compared to Western music. There's a really fascinating study where they took 6-month-old babies and had them listen to different scales. And they would remove notes from some of those scales, and if they did, the baby would respond a certain way. Basically, like testing to see, like, can babies detect differences in these scales? And what was really interesting is that babies were really good at perceiving missing notes in both Western scales and in Indonesian scales. So, all right, one of the last times actually, I think I might have a couple of songs I'm going to play for you after this. Anyways, so here's like an example if I'm going to play like an octave or play a scale, like. All right, that is a whole scale. Sounds nice, right? It sounds very rudimentary. But if I were to play a wrong note, do you think you can tell me what note it is? One more time. All right, you probably detected it, right? It was this one. So that's the wrong one. No, I played 2 wrong ones. But you get the idea. And so babies will be able to point that out, and you can point that out as well. But if I were to play a Javanese scale, which I can't do on this instrument, it'd be much less likely that you, as an adult, would be able to identify that difference. The final part of this chapter is to talk a little bit about musical structure, and so the melody is a significant part of a song. And in fact, I think even though I'm a drummer and I love rhythm, I feel like the melody is the most important part. The melody is the part of the song that you can sing to yourself. It is the part that you can hum. It is the part that gets stuck in your head. And so think of whatever your favorite song is, the part that repeats in your head that you kind of sing to yourself, assuming it has lyrics, that's the melody. And so an example of that would be like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So for example, here's a nice little melody, one of the first songs I learned on guitar. Tell me if you know it. Alright, it's a James Bond theme song, right? That is a melody. That is something that you can play, that it has like it's a musical idea that can be communicated with, I don't know if you can hear my wife laughing in the background. Hold on one second. For any other kind of sorry, I was talking about the James Bond theme song. So that is a song that you can hum, and it is the part of the song that makes it recognizable. And I know you can probably think of some beats and some rhythms that are also recognizable, but generally speaking, the parts that are sung, the parts that we hum, the parts that we whistle, those are, that is the melody. And it is pitch dependent. In other words, you can't really screw around with the same, with different notes. If you do, it changes the melody. So if I were to play that exact same song, but just I'm gonna play some different notes, you'll see. So so in this case, that is an example of how the melody is tied to those notes. However, with that being said, we could easily just shift up an octave and it be okay. So I have a capo right here, and so basically what I'm doing is I'm shifting all the notes up. And so actually let's do it kind of high. So I'm going to play the exact same melody, but it's going to be higher pitched, and it's going to work because it's the notes have the same pattern within themselves. Same melody, the only difference here is that it has been shifted up a couple of notes. So you see this all the time, actually, whenever you're working with musicians who are maybe a guy with a deep voice who's covering a higher pitched song. The first thing that comes to mind is that video of Vin Diesel singing karaoke to "Stay" by Rihanna, and you know, Vin Diesel, he's the voice of Groot. He's got that extremely gravelly, low-pitched voice, and so like he's singing the song, it is very recognizable, you know it, but it's basically pitched down an octave, and it's still the same melody. The beat is probably what you would expect. It is just the rhythm, which is a repetition of different notes that are presented at different timings and at different durations. This generally doesn't have notes to speak of. There's not really tone chroma that go into rhythm the same way that you would see that with melody. So cars can have rhythm, for example. Cars or a bus, you know, like if it has some kind of repetition to it, it can have rhythm, just like a copying machine can have rhythm as well. Our perception of how fast that rhythm is known as tempo. And so tempo is not the speed of the music, but it's our perception of the speed of that music. And in most cultures, music is just a combination of these things. It's a combination of the rhythm, so some notes that are repeating, some notes that are being played over and over, versus a melody that goes on top of that you sing with. A couple of last ideas before we wrap this up. I wanted to mention absolute pitch. Absolute pitch is this phenomenon that people can have where they can hear a note and they can tell you exactly what it is off the top of their head without consulting anything. It's pretty uncommon, does not happen very much, and part of it is because we don't exactly know how it develops, but we do know that it does seem to have something to do with early interventions with music, where people, if they get exposed to music education really early in their life, they might be able to learn how to do this. It's the same thing as a critical window with language, if you're familiar with that, where like if you don't learn a language within the first 13 years of your life, it becomes exceedingly hard to learn any language. It seems like absolute pitch is the same kind of idea, different part of the brain, but similar kind of developmental component. This is also why it's very frustrating for people that learn music later in life, in their teenage years and beyond, that they can't develop absolute pitch. It's one of those things where if you miss out on that early childhood window, that it's just gone. And then we have misophonia, which is we don't know all that much about right now. There's been some good research on it, but in terms of exactly what causes it, that's still a matter of some debate right now. And in fact, I don't even have anything on this slide to tell you about. But misophonia is essentially a perceptual difference that individuals have, where certain high-pitched sounds, like the smacking of lips while eating, or the crinkling of a bag, or things like that, are turned up for certain individuals, where they hear it much, much louder than somebody else would, than most people do. And so for that reason, it's extremely aversive, which is why you might have some relatives that have yelled at you before because you're smacking while you eat, because for whatever reason, for their brain, those signals that are making its way to their cortex is much louder than what you would be experiencing. or most of you. I mentioned cortex there in part because we know that it's a perceptual difference, that there isn't really a difference in the cochleas of these individuals. It has something to do with our interpretation of the signals we get from the cochlea that is causing people to have this really aversive, loud reaction to sounds that most people don't even think about. Maybe it's the clicking of a pen, the chewing of gum. It drives some people crazy in part because it's so much louder. If you ask me, it probably has something to do with the medial geniculate nucleus, if I had to guess. Something to do with the thalamus, but I guess we'll find out in the next couple of years. Thank you so much for watching. Here are some other videos in case you want to dive into more of this stuff and learn more about it. Like if you want to learn about some language deficits, I got some for you there. But thank you so much for hanging with me, and I will see you later. Bye. Oh, actually, before you go, special little treat for those of you that stay to the very end, just like in one of those other videos. If you take time to email me and tell me what your favorite hook in a song is, so maybe a hook that is an earworm, a hook that has got stuck in your head. It's a melody of a song recently where you're like, oh man, I love that hook. Can't get enough of it. It gets stuck in my head. I keep singing it to myself. Email me whatever that is, and I'll give you points for the next exam. All right, so that's my thank you for hanging in to the very end. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.